Now recording. So, hi everybody. My name is Sandy Hart, and I'm the president of Sarah. Welcome to the virtual Red Tent. Thank you for stepping inside the sacred space where we can let our hair down and be in communion with sisters. Hear from one another, learn from one another, be very loud together, be very quiet together. Whatever we are called to be here, we are in a safe place. This is Sarah. I will just share with you a little bit about Sarah, and I'm going to also tell you a little bit about the Charter for Compassion International, because a few of us are connected that way. And it's actually how I came to know Joan. And so the Charter for Sarah is the women's interfaith group that started after the events of 9/11 as a call to gather women. And I simply opened my front door and got out of the way, having invited women of different faith traditions to come together to explore who we were as women of our community. And I think the best thing we ever did was get out of our own way and let spirit rise. That's where I met Lynn Moffat, who you can see on your screen. And years ago when Sarah first started, and that was 15 years ago, our home meetings are in the spirit of this virtual space as well. We've had hundreds, I should do the math, what's 12 times 15. They're about home meetings and community events and supporting our community in the interfaith world. The Charter for Compassion International was a natural progression for Sarah to move into our community because of their City of Compassion initiative. And so we're very closely related. We're both partners of one another's organizations. And the Charter for Compassion is a global thriving network of over 400 cities of compassion in 52 countries, organized into 12 sectors. I'm the director of the Women and Girls sector, and Joan Marie actually happens to be the director of Women and Girls in the Sacramento region, in the Capital Region, which is in the Northern California area. And actually, you'll hear a little bit more about Lynn, and I'm going to be sharing with you something that she wrote that is actually published on the Charter for Compassion site too. Nice. At any rate, so you're going to be hearing more about a little bit about the Charter, so that I just wanted to give you a little understanding of who the Charter for Compassion is and how we all know each other. And Amy is also on the call here, and I work with Amy at the United Religions Initiative. They're something like that, right? I mean, I was the president for the North American region, and so Amy's been in my orbit, and I've been in her orbit. We've been in the same constellation, so I'm happy to see you again, Amy.
Well, I'd like to know more about this Charter of Compassion and how to become a part of it.
Absolutely, and I'm going to go ahead for now and just put that in the chat window for you. And anything I'm chatting or any ideas are not ideas, but links and things that come up, they'll be in the chat, and that chat will also be sent out to you after this call, along with the recording. I mentioned we are recording this call, and I'd ask you to keep that in mind, because Joan, after I introduce her, is going to be sharing with us this really, really exciting and beautiful topic on claiming our right to joy. And then she will open it up for questions and comments and cross dialogue. And just keep in mind that we are recording. This recording can go out live or not live, but be published out in the world. And if you feel something's coming up and you think it's time to you want to be in this safe environment and you don't want it shared, raise your hand and we can all agree. We've gotten past the presentation and now we're into the personal dialogue. We will stop the recording and continue our conversation. It's much easier to do that than ask me to edit out everybody at the end. Lesson learned. Let's do a quick little bit of housekeeping. You all have mute buttons. If you notice some background noise, I don't hear any now, so thank you. But you can mute yourself. And also, if you have anything to add to the chat, you can do so. Keep in mind that when you chat, if you're chatting privately to one another, that does come out in the chat report. So that's something also. So I want to be full transparency and disclosure here. What else? So before I introduce Joan, I wanted you to put on your calendar November 21st is our next virtual Red Tent with with Lynn Moffat, our spiritual leader here tonight. And Lynn will be speaking to us on accessing our spiritual consciousness.
Yay.
We had a long talk about how are we going to sum up that conversation in the title. So we'll leave it at that. So mark your calendars for November 21st. So now it is my delight and honor and privilege and joy. I'm claiming my joy to introduce Joan Marie. Joan is, like I mentioned earlier, the director of the Women and Girls sector in the Capital Region area. So I get to work with Joan there and play with Joan. She's the co-founder of Compassionate Capital Region, the vice president for the Northern California, Healing Hands and Healing Hearts, and she's also the owner of Enter the Orchid. And just a week or so ago, Joan hosted the grand opening of her Compassion Central office. So there is a brick and mortar place to go experience compassion. And you work with veterans, and there's so many layers and so many beautiful sparks about this woman. I can't wait for you to hear from her. So I think that's, and also you were a cast member of the Vagina Monologues.
I was.
Yeah, there's so much to know. And I think I'm just going to stop there.
I was the moaner.
Say that again?
I was the moaner.
Oh, if you have any of you seen the
Oh my God,
that's a good role. Did you ask for that?
No. I was mortified when I first got it, but I definitely had to learn to step into it, that's one of the things I've thought about. It would be so wonderful to get people to come together that have been in the monologues to talk about how the experience changed them.
Okay, let's host a call.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Okay. Lindsay was in the Vagina Monologues as well. We weren't at the same time, but yeah, I learned a lot, and that's one of the things I wanted to mention today. That one of the things that I've realized in really bringing the word compassion more into my consciousness and dialogue is that what does compassion mean, and being aware of more and more suffering in the world. I have been a body worker since the 1990s, and so I learned to work with all ages. So I've worked with infants through elders, and doing hospice and holding space for people, and just some things like your topic next month. So it'll be great to hear you talk about it, Lynn. Is one of the things I became really aware of is that our culture waits until people die to say rest in peace. Why is that not a right? That should be a human right and necessity to be able to rest in peace while we're alive. And I have a lot of concern now as the grandmother that we take that away from our children on the planet. And I feel like they deserve that. So that's really made me more committed to the compassion program. So what I wanted to start with is for all of us to just take some unified breaths together. So we're kind of in this journey even deeper than just this phone call, that will be unified with our breaths. So just let's get comfortable. And I like doing both inhale and exhale through the nostrils. There's lots of different ways to breathe, but what I like about that is it creates a unified pattern of breath that usually sometimes on our inhale we kind of gulp it if we do it through our mouth, and this kind of slows everything down, and it's our natural filtering process in using our nostrils. So let's go ahead and take an inhale. And hold for a moment, and then exhale through the nostrils. And let's do that a couple more times. And as you do this breath, simply notice that your tongue can thicken and soften and rest on the roof of the mouth. Good. And there is a term called Amrita, and it's the nectar of the gods. And in yogic practice, by having the tongue thickened and resting on the roof of the mouth in the back of the upper back palate, that can stimulate the that natural form of nectar in the body. And I feel like these are little jewels that if we do the research, we find them and we can pull them all together. And it's the feminine that's been waiting for us to return in full force. And so since we're the ones here on the planet in physical form, I think it's a joyful part of our journey to explore and find all these hidden pieces again on how we can more fully inhabit our bodies. And one of the things hopefully I'll be able to create some kind of order for this, but my journey really kind of started when my kids were young. And I've had this process of learning to trust that inner voice. A lot of times we have situations where we feel that it can be really scary to trust our inner voice, because it a lot of times it can ask us to do things that a lot of other people don't want us to do. So that can stir a lot of things up. And a lot of times as women, we've been taught to, make things okay and don't rock the boat and things like that. So it can really call us to kind of cut our own path. And so one of the things that happened for me, I just realized I got unplugged and I don't want to lose there we go. When my children were 6 and 8, I'm an artist as well. And one of the things that happened was I started hearing this phrase come to me called mirth to earth. And I love playing with words and learning word origins and things like that. And so the word mirth is an old English word that means celebration and joy. And so I loved that and didn't know like what it would mean, but I wanted to incorporate it in my life. And so it's been with me for a long time. My kids are in their 30s now. And a long time ago, it was in the 1990s, I took a business license out under Mirth to Earth. And that's kind of the umbrella of where I do more of my own expression of who I am. It's a lot of my art that's kind of grown to Magdalene's Mirth, because that's just me. I went into a business partnership with a gentleman that he's a photographer and he's done just incredible photography. And we actually used some of that with the Joan of Arc play that we just did this last weekend. So coming forward, one of the things that happened from our call last month that I wanted to tie in was my journey with Mary Magdalene. Growing up Catholic, there was always like questions, and for me with the Catholic religion, the more questions you ask, the more the structure kind of unravels, because there's just things that don't really make sense for women, and I think just individuals once you start asking. And I think that's part of why they really want you to have blind faith, because then they can keep it structured and controlled, right? So part of what happened with my journey with Mary Magdalene is I got really fascinated, and because I got involved with her in the 90s, I would have to read a whole book to find like, one or two sentences about her. And now, then it downloaded with Dan Brown, now you find books everywhere. But what happened for me is in reading about Mary Magdalene in the Bible, what fascinated me is that she was the first person to see Jesus after he had been resurrected. And so that right there told me that would not be an insignificant person that would be chosen. He wouldn't do that with just anybody passing by, right? So, logically, And so I thought that was really curious. Well, there was a phrase in the Bible that really stuck with me, that when she first saw him, she mistook him for the gardener. That like really fascinated me, because what's that mean? That if he's in etheric form, did it mean that there were gardeners that were more in etheric form that people could actually see at that time? Like, what's that mean? And so I did ask some priests, and they gave, kind of obscure answers, and, that those things like that were for them to interpret for us and things like that. So what I found was, as I got more involved in yoga, I learned, I took some classes with Buddhism, and I do feel like I'm more of a spiritual person, not a religious person. So I think that there's value and beauty in almost all religions, and that they'll all come together and they intersect. And so one of the things that they use is the concept of the sacred gardener. Well, one of my first paintings was the sacred garden, and I love the concept that if we think of ourselves and our spiritual world, that who we are at this time could be a sacred gardener for our lives and for our thoughts, that we can pull the weeds of the thoughts that no longer serve us. We can sow the fruits of our spirit, which, we've heard that languaging before as well, and that there's a whole process. And so understanding and learning about the chakras and that whole energy system, I really learned the phrase from the root to the fruit, and that depending how we really plant our seeds, how we tend them, that can have a lot to do with the fruit that we end up bearing, and that creates nourishment for ourselves as well as others. So that's, kind of a Reader's Digest version that has brought me to this point. And so one of the things that has really struck me is that I think as women that we have a natural yearning for celebration and joy and coming together. When in 2008, during the financial crash, I lost my home, and I made a decision that I really wanted to be in as much conscious process with that as possible. And so even though it was a really difficult time in my life, I invited a lot of people over, and I was in another room while they were all in the kitchen, and I could just hear all these voices of the women, and they were bringing food and laughing, and I had this sense, this is what women do. This is what women have done forever, and that we're a part of that. And so it was so beautiful that even though it was a difficult time, people shared the joys that they had experienced in my home. And it was so touching. And I think it's a way of honoring what happens to us and making it part of the whole of who we are. And finding a way to honor our grief, because grief, for my perception of grief, is that it can create a sacred portal to different depths of joy, and that as individuals, the richer and more fully that we show up as women and human beings, that that can really create a place for us to be more in a place of wholeness, that we experience the bittersweetness of life, and that honoring that life is a spectrum, that it's not all just about being happy, and it's not all about being sad, and that we can find that richness by honoring all of it and finding the joy, and that consciously creating joy is part of the process, and that it creates that, just that process in itself creates a sense of healing as well. So when Sandy and I had talked about what kind of subject would I do, I feel like that's very present for me right now, and the importance of it. I'm more fully in my crone, and I feel like that's part of my legacy that I want to share, is that I feel like that's where I can be kind of radical and a warrior of the spirit and a warrior for the heart, is to include joy and mirth in the process. And in my journey through art, sometime I'll have to put some of my art together, and we'll do this because I wanted a modern version of the Three Graces. And so my business partner did the photography, and we got these beautiful young women to do the imagery of the Three Graces. And as I did research, I found that throughout history, I found like over 20 images throughout, hundreds of years, that there was even time where they had it as coins. So there's unknown things that have been lost in the history because it's only history. They kind of put her story out, and we're even seeing that on a current level with like Dolores Huerta. We just saw her documentary, and I'm going to be contacting Laura O'Connor to find out if we can have a showing again in March for Women's History Month, because Dolores was a woman from the 1970s. I was in high school in the 70s, early 70s, and to realize, almost everybody knows who Cesar Chavez is, but I had never even heard of Dolores Huerta. Realize that he actually joined forces with her because of the work that she was doing, and yet she's been virtually written out of history. So thank God somebody made a documentary about her, and that has really spurred my life in currently, that I did research in again, being called by spirit. I think that if I could really have any kind of like steps that I would encourage you, is listen to your inner voice, even if it seems like strange. And I actually call upon it, especially when I go into a bookstore. I'll ask spirit to guide me to a book. And I've literally, at a library, I've had a book fall off the shelf. I've had, and I've had books, some are like sticking out. You have a whole row and there's one sticking out, and you pull it and it's like, oh my God, I was supposed to read this. So you just, I think that's part of how we develop our intuition. So, and these were all things that in the temples, when families would bring, they would choose one of their daughters, usually around the age of 6, to go into the temples, and they would stay there like 30 years. And they, after 30 years, they would be given the choice. They could stay and become teachers, or they would go back and integrate into the community. And so many would marry and have children of their own, but they learned all of the arts. And that's one of the statements that's made in the play Joan of Arc, is where is all the women's art throughout history? Where's the music? Where's the paintings? We just don't see them. And yet I have a very strong feeling that there's plenty down in the basement of the Vatican. It's just a theory. I can't wait till we all get to go down there. But, so one of the people that was really significant for me was Julia Ward Howe. Spirit started calling me, and I did research about her. And from organizing the Day of Peace events, I met some of the people that were trying to get the Department of Peace in the United States. And doing research, I found that the Department of Peace has been turned down over 100 times. 100 times. That's trillions of dollars on war, and not zero, nada for peace. So that will change. We'll do it. But so Julia Ward Howe, back in 1870, right after the Civil War, wrote the Peace Day Proclamation. And in the year 2020, that will be the 150th anniversary. So that's really exciting to me. And then in 1920 was the 19th Amendment, which was the women's right to vote, and that will be the 100th anniversary in 2020. So something's happening. You know, in the 14, 15, and 1600s, we did have a feminine genocide. And so since then, this really is the most women over the age of 40 on the planet that we've had. So this is a very exciting time to be inhabiting a female body, and claiming our right to joy, I think is really imperative right now. And there's a lot of pain and suffering on the planet, and we have to own our grief and have compassion for suffering, so we're appropriate with how we celebrate. And I love Julia Ward Howe, with the Peace Day Proclamation, she asks people to gather and you meet first and you bewail and commemorate the dead. That first you honor the grief. And then through that sacred process, that allows you to have joy. And I think that there's lessons to be learned by each of these things. So are you guys tracking me? Should I take a breath?
I have a couple of things to add. I don't know if this is a good time. Two things. One of them was about when you said about the about tilling the soil, making the field of your life. I studied Sufism, and that is one of the inner paths, is that you recognize this inner field, which is first full of rocks, right? And so you have to get in there and shovel out all the rocks. Then you have to do the plowing, you have to take out the weeds, and then you have to plow it. Then you have to get the good seed, and then you have to plant the seed. Then you have to water the seed. I mean, it's a process. And then, of course, you grow your garden in beauty. And also, I wanted to read this to you, which you probably know this, maybe you don't.
No, please share.
What Jesus said. You were talking about Jesus, and what Jesus said about the parable of the weeds. Have you heard of this one?
No, please share.
So explain the simile of the parable of the weeds. And he answered them and said, "He who is sowing the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world, and the good seed, these are the sons of the rain, and the darnel, which is the bad seed, are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is a full end of the age, and the reapers are the messengers. As then the darnel is gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be in the end, in the full end of this age. The Son of Man shall send forth his messengers, and they shall gather up out of his kingdom all the stumbling blocks, all those who are doing lawlessness, and shall cast them into the furnace of the fire, and there shall be the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the reign of the divine. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. So this was about the field, again, that Jesus is talking about. And then I wanted to read to you this one thing, which I thought you'd be interested in after what you were saying. I'm reading this great book now, Rashi's Daughters. You know this book. So this is by a woman, and her name is Maggie Anton. Maggie Anton was interested in this one rabbi who's very, very famous, named Rashi. And every commentary that, every Torah or every book that's made has Rashi's commentary straight down the center. But Rashi had 3 daughters. Nothing was mentioned anywhere about the 3 daughters. Nobody knew who they were or anything about them. And this woman has spent her life, 20, 25 years, studying every scrap that she could find and made these 3 books, one for each of the daughters.
Wow.
So this is a pretty interesting part because, again, this hidden part about the women were not allowed to study the Mishnah, which is the oral tradition, okay? And in Rashi's time, he didn't have any sons. The most famous guy, the most famous rabbi didn't have sons, but he taught his daughters this secret law. And Maggie brought this part out. She's always bringing out, I love her books. She's bringing out hidden stuff about women, okay? And so in this one part, her mother is having a baby. She's in labor. The daughter's name is Johaved. She's one of the daughters. And she's very upset. Is her mother going to be okay? So Rashi brings her over to the Talmud, and he has her read this story. And afterwards, she bore a daughter. But what is meant by afterwards? And it comes to the fact that this woman who was who's mentioned is hold on one second, let me just find her name, who was birthing. Hold on. I can't find the name. Oh, yes, it's Leah. Leah was birthing. This is a story that you haven't heard.
Well, before you dive into that story.
Oh, no, it's only one. It's a short paragraph.
Oh, got it. Okay, good. Because I want to make sure that we can get. I want to give everyone a chance to speak, but I also want to get the name of what you're reading, and because I'm going to put a list in it. And I'll put a list.
Yeah.
12 tribes will descend from my husband Jacob. 6 have come from me, and 4 from his concubines. That makes 10. And if this baby that I'm carrying turns out to be a boy, it won't be good for Rachel, which is her sister. And immediately the child in her womb was turned into a girl, as it is written, and afterwards she bore a daughter. And Jochebed thought a while and said, so prayer can change the sex of a woman's child, a pregnant woman? No, said the rabbi, only a woman who is advanced. Wow. And I find that very interesting, these little tidbits. if you get a chance to read these books.
I will I'll put that out in the Rashti's
It's
daughter.
all the way through. There's women's secrets coming out. Maggie Anton, Anton. I can't take the cover off because I had to get it as a special loan from the library.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much.
Rashi's Daughters. Rashi's Daughters.
Wonderful.
There's another, thank you for sharing that. And there's a wonderful book about life in the temples called Moon Under Her Feet. And that's just such a beautiful story. So yeah, I think that's part of the joy of the journey, right?
All this stuff is coming out. You know that the men had access to these women's stories, but we never heard them.
Yeah, I love, Joan, how you just reminded us about having joy in the grief, having joy in, and that I just want to share with you before I do so much talking on these calls. I'm going to try not to do that because I talk so much in the beginning and the end. But it reminded me of the Course in Miracles, which speaks about that separateness is an illusion. And the separateness from one another, and also our separateness from that we don't think should, that the illusion of pain, the illusion of grief, the illusion. It's all, it's all part of the experience of, like you said. I don't want to repeat what you said, but I wanted to, to remind us all to really. Yesterday I had a lowest vibration day personally. I just was in the, I've just had a really great human experience, really good one. And and that helped. It helped to remind me that life isn't, who said it's about being easy? It's about the lessons. Otherwise you get muscle atrophy if you don't strengthen these sort of muscles when you need them. Otherwise you get flabby and loose and you can't function as well as if you had, that inner muscle, that inner knowing and reminder. And then you find that, but you framed it so beautifully with it being about joy. I thought about, well, it's a lesson, but when you put it that way, it means that we can dance in that.
Mm-hmm.
It means it's a gift that you can open.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, who is?
Oh, it's Lynn. It just means that it's a gift that you can open. I always hated the lessons because they were always very painful. But if I opened it, I could find out that it was a gift. It's an opportunity.
Well, and I think as women, part of the feminine is that we express through the arts.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's part of how we process. And I'll send, Sandy, I'll send it to you later, but I went through a time of, it was like a decade. I called it my tsunami, my emotional tsunami, because it was a decade of loss and surrender and grief. And so I had to do art to just kind of process. And I had an amazing experience with this one piece. I was working with photography of this photo of this beautiful egret, and it was coming out of the water. You could see the little tiny drops of water as it was taking flight. And I found this quote that I wanted to use, and his words said, I'll send you the quote, but it's basically something about that grief is an opportunity to acknowledge that which has been experienced, and that because it's been experienced, it can never be wholly lost, and that it's in our bones and it's part of us. And as I was working with this, it was a computerized piece. And as I was doing it, I swear to God, another image of an egret popped up, and it was larger than the other one, and it was more opaque. And the second I saw it, it's like Spirit was telling me, this is why nature knows how to migrate, because those who have come before are in our bones. They're part of us.
Mm.
And that was such a huge piece of healing for me.
Yeah.
And knowing that because it's been experienced, it can never be wholly lost. I think that's beautiful.
Beautiful.
I have while it's still with me, the egret is, I believe it's the Oriental, so Chinese and Japanese. It's a high symbol. But crisis in Chinese, the way that it's written, actually means opportunity.
Nice.
So I never did like that, Sandy. You know some of my 10-year process.
But I always think of ISIS, that you're calling out for ISIS.
Ah, interesting. My nickname is Lady Ma'at from an Egyptologist, because I healed him from a death process at one point. And so he called me Lady Ma'at because I was the gal with the feather.
Wow.
That weighed the heart after they pass. That weighed the heart on the scale of there's a human experience that you put in, and then you put the feather in, and whatever is lighter gets to move on. And if the feather's lighter, you don't get to move on. You've got to go back through the process again.
Whew.
Yeah. However, if your heart is lighter than the feather, you get to ascend. So that's ancient Egypt.
Oh, I would love some information on that. We're going to have a whole call on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The way that I heard that, I studied it, was that the heart, yes, is put on one side of the scale and the feather is on the other. And if the heart's heavier, then Ma'at has you review your entire life story until the heart is purified.
Wow.
So you aren't left. The compassion is that she helps you to purify the heart, and then you get to move on.
Beautiful.
Which is usually meant by going back through the human again.
Well,
that's that whole reincarnation standpoint.
Sometimes, but sometimes you can go right through.
When I'd like to share when I went through letting go of my home. I had lived there for 30 years. My kids were born there. Lots of story there, lots of my life. And because I had made the commitment to do it as consciously as possible, that was a time when a lot of homes were being foreclosed, and so people were tearing them apart and stuff. Well, without even realizing it, I knew I wanted to be in gratitude for my house, and I had a sacred garden in my backyard, so that was really hard to leave. But I got roses from my backyard, and I put rose petals in each room the last time that I was there, and so I said goodbye and gratitude in each room. And as I left my house, I was walking to my car, and I heard Spirit say, and that is how you will leave the home of your body.
Wow.
Beautiful.
And that was huge. I felt like that. I think those are the gifts that come when you do the acts of the highest. If you keep reaching for the highest form of your consciousness, that there's great gifts in that.
Yeah.
So, but you said something that was really interesting. You said, listening to your voice. And don't we all listen to it? We just then dismiss it. So we have to trust our voice.
Yes. It's deepening, creating a deeper intimacy with that aspect of ourselves, because it speaks to us. I believe that that's what the sixth sense is, because we can experience it through kinesthetic, chills, or we can have a vision of something. We can hear words, that it can be experienced through any or all of the senses. So yeah, we need to trust it.
And of course, pay close attention to it. So, because we bypass it all the time.
Well, and sometimes you got to pull on those big girl panties and do what really scares you, because it can really scare you.
So Lindsay, Lindsay, you're on the phone and we can't see you if you're raising your finger or something. So is there, I don't know if you wanted to chime in, or we know you're here with us, so we don't want you to think we've forgotten.
Or who are you saying?
Well, actually, I was speaking to Lindsay, but Maggie, you
Oh,
too, of
okay.
course.
Oh,
We can see you. And
yeah. Okay. I'm here. Yeah. I'm taking it all in.
yeah,
I
wonderful.
did have one. I did have one story as you were talking about, how grief and pain can actually be, a major gift for us. And it was a story I saw on Facebook yesterday about a woman that had been, was a twin in the concentration camps, and when the Jews were persecuted. And because she was a twin, she and her sister were used as they experimented on twins. The Germans were trying to understand about twins, and they went through horrific, torture, and almost died. And they were like little girls, like 10 years old when this all happened. And then they got through it. They didn't die. And this lady is talking, she's probably in her 80s now or older, and she talks about how she came to forgive. And when she was connected with a group of people, that had survived the Holocaust, and they wanted her to connect with a German doctor and come and do a talk. And she got this German doctor that had watched people be killed, and he would see the people go into the rooms where they would gas them, and then he would wait until no one was moving, and then he would write a death certificate for one person. And she got him to write what he had done and have it notarized, so she could, if anyone said nothing happened, to the Jews, she had this to show them, But then she decided, because he did this for her, she wanted to forgive him. And so she was going to write a letter, and she got someone to help her write this letter. And out of it, and then this person asked her if she wanted to forgive the doctor that had tortured her and her sister so much. And she wasn't quite ready to do that. But then she realized by forgiving, it empowered her, and she got her power back from the whole horrific experience. And I think, to me, I was just sitting there crying, hearing her story, and how her sister finally had died, but she got out of the concentration camp and got married and had children and had a life. But this woman really was given an extra gift in her forgiveness. And I think, that's something that personally, I've had some challenges with forgiveness. So it really spoke to me. It actually, it's not for, who you're forgiving, it's for yourself. And it's really freeing. So that's what I got to share.
Maggie, that's
Yeah.
a perfect lead-in with connecting with Lindsay to speak about Joan of Arc. You were at the play.
Yes.
One of the things that she talked about was instead of looking at forgiveness, look at resolution.
Yes, you wrote that on the Facebook. Yeah. And that's kind of what happened with this woman.
Mm-hmm.
She came to resolution with what she and her sister went through. And that's bigger than that's really maybe at the core of forgiveness is resolution, right?
Yeah, well, it takes you to a place of peace, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
And with the Joan of Arc, it's the second coming of Joan of Arc, and it was written by Carolyn Gage.
It's so wonderful.
Oh, it's very powerful. It's a one-woman play, 2 acts, and Lindsay was. I'll let her tell her story, but what I want to say about the lead into it is that what I found really fascinating is that Joan of Arc was the most thoroughly documented figure of the 15th century. I find that really fascinating. They even did a second trial 20 years after she was dead. That, you know, it's a fascinating story. And what I found really fascinating was I kept looking at, because it was so intense, I really wanted to have something that inspired people, instead of like what I've experienced, like with Michael Moore movies. Sometimes it's just so much information you think, like, oh my God, what do I do with all this depressing information? And there is a phrase in Japan, and it's called kintsugi, and it's the art. The word means golden rejoining, and it's the art of when pottery is broken, that the act of bringing it back to a place of wholeness with using gold, that creates something stronger and even more beautiful. And when I was doing some research to put, you know, these two things together, what I found was that kintsugi was created in the 15th century. Isn't that wild?
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Beautiful.
one of the things that I love is it said that can we, whoops.
Ooh,
That's our picture.
fabulous.
Oh,
Kintsugi.
Is this?
It's a bowl.
It's-
Oh, how fabulous.
Oh,
And
It's
so
repairing the bowl, and the bowl actually
Wow.
becomes not only stronger but more beautiful.
yes.
Gorgeous.
Isn't that awesome? And so
Yeah.
what their concept was asking is, can we, instead of just thinking of it as something destructive by breaking or by us being wounded, can we also see the process as constructive?
Yeah.
And that what we've been through, we're all past the stage of maiden. We're no longer maiden, but that maidenhood is an aspect of us still. So part of crone was originally for males and females, and it meant the crowning of your life, that your life is coming to a place of culmination. And so in thinking in those terms, that can our life experiences make us more fully present as spiritual beings in human form?
yep.
So Lindsay, do you want to jump in on that?
Oh my goodness! Wow. Wow. That is, it's a
That's what you
beautiful
were
art
doing.
form.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
I would have to say that play was a kind of shattering, I felt, and then just the therapy of it in itself, you know, being able to read it and read it and read it and read it and try and understand her story. And I mean, I don't really know what to say. that that experience was so amazing and so intense and so, I mean, it blew open a lot of things for me. And I don't, you know, I don't know what to say.
It was a one-woman show, was it not?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I would love to. Is the play? Can we read the play? It's probably not an
It's
assumption. It's not.
Samuel French. Samuel French has the rights to the play. I think that you can download it there. I don't know where. Joan, do you know where to download Carolyn Gage's play?
Yeah, if you search, do a search for Carolyn Gage, you can get the body. I did the ebook,
Oh, it's
and it
an
was
ebook.
the Samuel. What is the name?
Yeah,
Samuel
Samuel French.
Samuel French.
Samuel French.
It's a collection of Carolyn Gage's work, and so Joan of Arc is in there. And it was $10. You know, it was really reasonable, and it's just a different perspective. But what I really want to honor for Lindsay, and hopefully you'll talk about it a little bit if you feel comfortable, Lindsay, is that your experience in doing the play was healing on a personal level because of what you've experienced of, you know, the violence from males and you know, just that whole process.
Patriarchy and hierarchy and all of that. Yes, it has been very interesting. I work in an industry that's very, you know, there's a lot of men in this industry, and there are a lot of women in this industry also, but it's very misogynistic. And I've been working in this in like holistic healthcare for 7 years, and working around, you know, plants and people that have illnesses. And the industry is a lot of men, and I've been around a lot of men, and it's been very interesting to watch the relationships that happen between men and women, and then to experience the relationships between and this is where Joan has helped me change my perspective, and, you know, have compassion for men, because they are also, you know, victims of patriarchy. And it's just been very, oh man, I'm still kind of processing you know, the play, because it's not only the 15th century, it's so present, not only politically, but emotionally for women, and compassionately, and being able to I think Joan brought this up too, but being able to stand in our power as women.
What I liked about the play too, and how each person brings their energy to something. So we talked about the vagina monologues. It's been done for 20 years, but each time you go, it's different, because the individual presenting it brings themselves into it. And I think that that's what Lindsay did so beautifully, that there were some men in the audience, and they did not feel like it was you know, against, they didn't take it personally. Do you know what I mean? Which can happen when there's a lot of pain and anger being expressed. And I think that was very masterfully done by Lindsay, that they were really seeing, Lindsay went into her own process with it, that it was really an expression through her. And I think that that's what we're all getting this opportunity to do in one way or another. But what she did was really incredible.
I'm so inspired, and in the spirit of that, the patriarchy that you bring up, this is circling back to something that you said earlier, Joan, about um, the insurgence of this divine feminine, the feminine and the rise. That we all know this. It's been prophesized, and you know, and for a long time, and we can feel it. We don't need to know it. We feel it. right? We don't have to have heard somebody else tell us this.
Right.
We feel it in our bones, and we know it's time, and we see things falling apart. So it's not breakdown, but breakthrough time. But regarding that, you remind me of Rianne Eisler's work on partnership, Center for Partnership Studies, and her work on the domination, not so much patriarchy as much as domination theory versus partnership theory, and how, we've been advancing in the form of domination mostly since, it's been very evident since the post-industrial age, but particularly seeing a shift in that happening now with the role of the gender specific, the way men are responding to the divine feminine. And this means that we need to be responsive as we see this shift in this balance of merging of the male and the masculine and the feminine. I believe it's our sacred wisdom, particularly of the first holders of that feminine energy as women, to ensure and midwife carefully into this era that we are not counterbalancing that domination or patriarchy with the same energy that we are trying to get away from.
Yeah.
Right. And I see that so often. And this is sort of, I have a lot of friends who are of a certain age who are, feminists from the 70s and 80s. And I was born in 61. So I kind of missed that era a little bit, and truly appreciating, the suffering that was going on there. Because I grew up with Mary Tyler Moore and Marlo Thomas as my mentor. They had it all together. They had their own apartment. I didn't what? What do you mean? Women don't have
We're going to make it after all.
Right? And so but with that said, that we
Oh my gosh, am I the oldest kid on the block here?
Yeah, and I think it's just our opportunity and our responsibility to just be the grace we want to see in the world. And yeah, so that's all I want to say about that. And by the way, I just noticed Ariella Shira Lewis is with us. Ariella, you're muted and we're not looking at you. We're seeing part of your desk, it looks like. Can we see your face and can you hear us? I love Ariella. Now you're unmuted. Ah, there she is. Hello. There's my sister.
Light is shining through.
You've got a halo as usual. Everyone meet Ariella.
I've never
Oh, your internet seems a little choppy.
done this before, so I've got an unstable internet connection, so every now
Oh, darn it. You're a little
and then I'm
only your technology is unstable.
I'm so
Oh, darn it.
grateful to be here. Thank you for what
You.
Oh, I'm so happy to see you. Ariella, I've known for years and years, 15 years probably, when I first stepped foot into this work of interfaith work.
wonderful to be here.
She's really special. And I also she's also a chaplain or a volunteer.
I'm really enjoying.
Oh, darn it. She's also a chaplain at the women's prison that I volunteer at, too.
Oh,
Or chaplain or a brown card volunteer, lead volunteer.
a woman's prison? Wow.
Yes,
Is that the main women's prison in Orange County?
yes, I was just there with them. Yes, the Jewish community did this at time.
Yeah, I chaplained there for 8 years in women's and men's.
Oh,
And men's prison.
Gosh darn it, Ariella, your internet. Try, another. Well, we'll talk afterwards. I'll call you on the phone.
Women shared their stories. Yes.
Oh darn, we can't make out what you're saying. So, but you.
I just wanted to contribute.
Okay. So happy to see you.
I'll listen.
Well, I do want to acknowledge, but
Ariella, we're getting some feedback. Okay, go ahead.
just with what you're saying, that I think that this is the evolutionary process that a lot of times, we know we need change, but we don't necessarily know how to do it. And I think that that's part of what happened in the 60s, is that a lot of women thought that in order to do that, to acknowledge the feminine, we have to act like men.
Yeah.
And now we're realizing, oh my gosh, there's this beautiful sacred process that we don't fully know or understand, but yet we're being called to it. Yeah. And I do want to acknowledge, Sandy, that when I got the opportunity, I'm a steward for a physical red tent in Sacramento. And when I got that opportunity to have the red tent, just by holding the phrase red tent, spirit started speaking to me. It was like immediate. So I really encourage all of you, I love that we're doing the whole concept of a virtual red tent, that just saying the words red tent will speak to you. It'll speak to your heart. It's been in our bones, and it's part of us. And I think it's a piece about the feeling nature of God that we've kind of separated. We've been taught not to trust ourselves, that when we do look at hysterectomy, that came from hysteria, that the wandering womb, that all those things that when women listen to themselves, they're crazy, right? And so that's part of it, is how do we own that? How do we listen to it and trust it, that we will not betray ourselves, and that spirit has no intention of betraying us. So,
Yeah.
and we're sacred vessels. Yeah.
We need another hour for this conversation. This is just too good to let this go. But I want to circle back really quickly and bring up mirth again, because mirth is basically what this conversation had started with.
Yes.
I just wanted to let you know that I don't wish anyone a happy birthday. I always wish them a happy mirth day.
Oh my God.
Fun.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. So, I know I've been doing that forever.
Oh my gosh.
So, and about red tent, and isn't that great?
I
And
love
I always put the mirth in, I always capitalize it and put it so that people recognize that, okay, I'm not wishing you a birthday, I'm wishing you a mirth day.
Yeah.
When I had said that about the three graces, that art piece, with the research that I had done, when I saw that throughout history, they would put images of women in those three clusters, that the graces, one of the qualities of the three graces was 3 times 3. So it was 3 maidens, 3 mothers, 3 crones. So it was actually 9, and one of them is mirth.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Like, oh my God, that's so awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so now I also want to circle back to the 6-year-olds and the red tent, because when I was 6 years old, I actually started my red tent.
Wow.
Yeah. And it continued. It wasn't anything, it continued. And I didn't even know what that meant, because I'm from the older generation I've got quite a few years on you guys. Like, my kids are in their 50s.
What?
So,
Wow, you look great.
I've known you all these years.
Yeah.
you've known me all these years. And actually, you and I met before Sarah. I saw Sarah in your eyes. You had an epiphany when we were at UCI at the Interfaith conference there, when I was being televised with a bunch of other people on a panel. And that's where you and I officially met. We had met before that, but officially we were arm in arm, hand in hand, chest to chest. We were hugging so tightly. It was one of those moments.
Wow.
And I looked at her, and her eyes glowed with something brand new. And I thought, oh, I wonder what she's going to bring forward. And she was birthing. At that moment, she had conceived.
Holy
Behold, Sarah.
Awesome.
Holy.
That was fabulous. So anyway, I wanted to just remind you. Remind you that. Because it was so special. It was so incredibly special. I knew that our lives were going to be entwined forever. from that moment. Yeah. So, but thank you for bringing all of this up, because just encircling in back and all of that. And then I went through the hysterectomy at a young age, and they tried to tell me after 6 children, well, we're not going to do it because you're still young. And it's like, yeah, no, we're doing it, okay? Because you're not going to get another chance to get back in there. So, but and I have lost 5 of my children, so I only have one that I bore left.
Oh dear.
And,
I'm so sorry.
and I had long time, over many years. But then I lost my home also. So I went through where I had they were teens when we had moved in, but to that particular home. But I was in it 21 years and went through the loss of that. So yeah, that's the profundity of the lessons that of the gifts that you have to open. It just sure didn't feel like a gift there.
Yeah. No, when you're going through the pain, it's really difficult.
Yeah. So it's really hard to find mirth during those times.
Right.
But the higher spiritual consciousness finds it.
Well, and I think knowing that it comes again, that's part of, before we close, there's a short poem I'd like to read.
Love it.
Sandy.
Yeah, before you do that, and as we are pulling in the drawstring of the red tent, or beginning to open the red tent, which is always so hard to do. As a matter of fact, when I have home meetings and
we never left.
No one ever wants to leave, and and I won't let anybody help me do the dishes either, because I'm so wired and energized. I'm up for hours afterwards.
I used to beg her to do dishes, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask something.
Yeah, I want to say something about the red tent, so I'm going to circle back after you're done. Go ahead, Amy.
I didn't know if this was a good time to bring it.
Go right ahead.
Well, we meet once a month or so, and there's a long time in between, and there's not as much time to share as we would like to. So I was wondering if we could share our email addresses and then maybe connect during the month. And I think that this collective consciousness, which you probably already know all this stuff, I'm just saying it, it grows, and it sends out these vibrations through the universe of whatever we're doing, even if we're not online and if we're not taping it or whatever. And then we can grow together throughout the seasons. I don't know. This is something I was thinking.
Well, we are developing a sisterhood. Anytime you step inside the red tent, you're in communion, and now we're invested in one another and we care for one another. I'll tell you what, if anyone does not want to share their email address in this circle here, you can let me know. You can let me know privately by text, by putting it in the chat window, or Lindsay, you can email me, and just out of respect for all of that. And then if I don't hear from you by tomorrow, then I'll send out an email for all of us. Also, you can meet on Facebook. We have a group and a page. I don't know why we have 2. They both do exactly the same thing, and I'm constantly duplicating, but we have 800 here and 500 there, and it's like, might as well just keep them. We also have a newsletter. If there's anything any of you ever want to get out into the world, you can always send it to me and it'll go out on our next newsletter. And also we have an email stream that I can send things out to as well. So thank you, Amy, for that inspiration to share that and remind me to tell you those things. Regarding the red tent, I just didn't want to forget to share this with you. So the red tent was something that we started at the Women's March, the actual red tent, where we actually bought miles of fabric and made a red tent. Because when we had an opportunity to have a booth at the Los Angeles Women's March, we thought, well, we want to stand out. They're going to be 10,000 people there. We thought there were 1 million people there.
Oh, wow.
It was reported 1 million people in Los Angeles. There are 4 million people around the world.
Yeah.
Like all the different marches, but Los Angeles, they had registrations of 750,000. But I know I didn't register. You didn't need to register, and the police said it's more like 1 million people here.
Yeah.
Anyway, so on one of the walk routes, because there were these parallel streets, everybody was walking or shuffling. Um, we said, let's create a sacred space. And we draped this red tent on all four sides with fabric, and we decorated the inside, and we put down a rug, outdoor rug, and pillows. Um, you know, um, pretend candles, and of course, can't have a women's gathering without chocolate. And so we had a bowl of chocolates and heart-shaped chocolates, and women and there was a waiting room for women to come in. Our tent, we couldn't have more than 10 or so many women in the space at once. And there were women waiting for other women to come out. And some women stayed in there the entire day.
Wow.
Some cried, some sat in silence, some sang. Sometimes it was raucous and loud and crazy. Sometimes it was nothing but tears. It was the most incredible day I couldn't say one of the most amazing days of my life. And to just experience that. Then I had to get out of the red tent a number of times, because I didn't need to take up the space. So I was sharing this with Joan, and she goes, well, can you bring the red tent to our event? And up in Sacramento, and I couldn't get there. So we came up with a better plan. So we had received some funding to do this. And I just said, here, Joan, take the funding, because it shouldn't come to us anyway. And now Joan is the servant of, is that what you called it? Steward of the red tent. And now she has her own red tent. And if any of you want to bring a red tent to your community, and Ariella, I have a red tent, so if anyone in LA wants a red tent, I can bring it up. But if, let's say, the Parliament of the Southern California Parliament wants a red tent, and you want to host it or what have you, or your women's group up there, then you can use Sarah as a fiscal sponsor to help you get the funds to get that. And it was like $600 or something, right? About by the tent, the fabric, the rugs, But that's a one-time cost.
I actually got a 10 by 10 red tent. But I have rug and pillows and all of that, and it's awesome. And now when I do events, like the ribbon cutting ceremony, we actually set the 10 by 10 at the opening of the door of my office. So people actually had to go through the red tent to enter the sacred space of the office. So I think that was just fantastic. So, yeah.
So I just wanted to close on that, since you know that there is actually a red tent. Yeah, it was crazy though. It's really something, and it was such a stark contrast. That you can imagine the energy outside the red tent at the Women's March, and it was all peaceful. There wasn't one incident in violence in 4 million people around the world. Not one incident, no recorded incidents of violence. It was a love fest. I mean, of course, everybody was like on one side of the fence, I mean, there weren't any, let's put it this way, there were no Trump supporters in our crowd, and there was, it was all really, but perhaps they were, but there were women holding their power. There's some pretty outrageous and offensive signs, but other than that, there were little girls, there were old men, and everything in between, and babies and strollers, dogs. It was humanity. And then you stepped into a completely different energy, just a thin veil, just a veil of sheer fabric. And suddenly you were transformed into a meditative place, or a place where you could process and empty, and I don't know.
Are we going to bring it to the Parliament?
That's where I got the original idea, was they had a red tent at the Parliament. So I've already, the Parliament of the World's Religions coming up and I know Ariella knows about this. Ariella and I had the most magical experience. I had the most magical experience at the Parliament in Australia. She's an angel, and literally she was my angel that day. But at any rate, the Parliament of the World's Religions is the world's largest gathering of people of all traditions and walks of life, and religion and culture, comes from every corner of the world. 10 to 12,000 people come to a given city every 4 or 5 years, And this next year, they're actually, it's 3 years later. It's going to be in Toronto. The last one was in Salt Lake City. Before that, it was in Melbourne. Before that, Barcelona. Before that, Cape Town. I think I'm missing one. And before that, Chicago.
Wow.
Oh, Ariella's frozen. Yeah,
When
there
is
you
it
are.
gonna be? When is it gonna be?
Barcelona.
Oh, Barcelona. Yeah,
Ah.
Barcelona. And there's
Did you
400.
say Barcelona? Barcelona.
Yeah, Barcelona. And there's 450 workshops and world leaders. The Dalai Lama's only missed one of the modern day parliaments because it was Salt Lake City and he was too ill to travel. So you want to get there. It's November 1st through the 7th. And it's November 1st through the 7th in Toronto, and go to Parliament. I'll put that out in the report, Parliament of Religions. But the reason I bring this up is because they had imagine a big conference center, expanded as big as it can be. And in one of the main alcoves, it was a room that they had draped as a red tent. And so that was the first seed that was planted. So I told the Parliament, because the Charter has a very unique relationship with the Charter, and because of the strong presence of women they're going to have again at the Charter this year, and they did the last Parliament, being with the women and girls sector, I'm going to be doing some programming with the Women's Task Force. And I told them already, if they're not doing a red tent, we will host the red tent. That was a very long way of saying that. Yeah. And Ariella, do we have one more minute? Can I just share my angels? This is just I just have to, it's on my heart. So we're in Australia, and I was supposed to do a workshop the next day, or that day. I was supposed to do a workshop that day, and I couldn't and I had to have my presentation on a thumb drive, and my computer wasn't cooperating, and I couldn't get the thumb drive, and I was just in panic mode. I didn't have any of these skills that you talk about here to know how to really just rest and let things flow. And I'm sitting there kind of in the utmost panic, and it was the early morning and not many people were there in the conference center. And I just decided to just stop and take a breath. And I looked up, and here comes floating down this long hallway is a stunning vision of Ariella, all dressed in a flowy white dress.
Oh,
And
fabulous.
her feet weren't touching the ground, but that's how she is. And she just floated towards me, and she sat with me. And I go, Ariella, I'm a mess. And she was just, and I don't remember exactly. I think maybe you just put your hands on me, and we just sat there and quiet for a while. You kind of guided me, you midwifed me through this. And then I opened up my computer, and it all worked. That's Ariella. We had our moment. So, yeah, the presence and the power we have in each other's lives is really so unique. And I'm so grateful for all of you. I can't tell you, every one of you. Lindsay, I'm sorry I can't see you, but I'm blowing you kisses. And thank you for, being with us, all of you. Is there anything else? Joan, do you want to say? Oh, you wanted to end us with your poem.
I'd love to end with the poem, if that's all right. Oh, it said Lindsay was talking. Lindsay, did you want to say something?
Thank you to Joan for making that play happen.
Well, I'm glad we're able to get in on this call,
Yeah.
and it looks like we're going to be doing it again in January. We had just unbelievable support and feedback about it, and also the desire from the people watching it that they wanted more people to see it.
Oh,
Which is exciting.
very nice.
Yes, I have a whole group that's going to be there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You hear that, Lindsay?
Please send us the information today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to the call.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to close with us joining together and in taking a unified breath, closing our eyes, and again noticing that your tongue is thickened and softened and resting at the roof of the mouth. And with your eyes closed, allowing your eyes to be open internally and looking upward as though your crown is a skylight. And just kind of hold that breath as I read to you this poem and see if it evokes any imagery for you. So it's called Death is But a Season. A dark, cold winter had entered my life. Quietly and slowly, it kept moving in, laying this ice-cold blanket of grief throughout my being. This frozen emptiness has no words, only the frigid chill of a heart without its mate. As I slowly move through this winter solstice, the icy wind blows round me, first a whisper, then a howl, that this death is but a season. I slowly close my eyes, and I don't understand, yet I cannot resist the smile. A fire stirs and smolders from the inside out, feeling a warmth only the soul can radiate. It fills me. My arms wrap round, embracing this gentle yet fierce glow, stoking the fire of my very being. These brittle cracks in my heart fuel the dance of these flames. They move me. Letting go, surrendering, becoming engulfed in firelight. Burned through illusion, I sway and pulsate naked and exposed, inviting, invoking, and calling forth a change in seasons. I raise my arms in the heated rapture of this abandon. New rhythms, new songs, new life. I celebrate. Spring is here, and summer is yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
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 Jai Ma. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Blessings.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, everyone.